Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News, in studio with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. And unfortunately, we're going to start with some bad news here on today's program. A Hezbollah drone strike in the town of Binyamina kills 4 IDF soldiers from the Golani Brigade as they were having dinner yesterday evening. Over 60 were wounded in the attack, other soldiers in serious condition. No sirens went off as the drone escaped Israel's air defense system. Just a horrible, horrible attack there yesterday, Alex.
Yeah, I think it demonstrates just how dangerous Hezbollah's arsenals are. You know, we talk a lot about the weapons, the missiles that they have, and the long range and the precision guided. They have a lot of drones. There were 2 or 3 unmanned aerial vehicles, drones sent yesterday. They were being tracked by radar, Israeli radar. They're being tracked, and one of them at least was shot down, and this one seemed to have was being tracked and then suddenly escaped the radar, and it was assumed that maybe it had crashed. The reason why it escaped radar is they're searching into that, but because they fly at very low altitudes, and as you said, this hit into the cafeteria of an army base. So these are precision guided. This drone was targeting that specific military base here. And I think it indicates a little bit of the difference in the war between Gaza and Israel and Lebanon and Israel. In Gaza, we talked about a number of times. Since October 8th, there was virtually no meaningful threat to the Israeli home front. That gave the IDF the opportunity to work very methodically through the Gaza Strip, go building by building, to take their time and to learn what they needed to learn and go on their own pace. Here with Lebanon, you see that the situation is very different. Lebanon can impose a tremendous threat to the home front, can do a lot of damage. We just saw last night that this can be a very painful war, and it means that the IDF is going to have to move as fast as possible in order to neutralize the threat of Hezbollah.
And you know what Hezbollah is going to do with this? They are going to claim, look, we only target military targets, which is absolutely false. In this case, it was a military target, but just an hour or so ago, they shot dozens and dozens of missiles at the coastal town of Netanyahu and surrounding areas, clearly indiscriminately targeting civilians, but they're going to use this for their propaganda machine.
Well, there's enough houses destroyed in towns in the north near the Lebanese border that demonstrate that these rockets and the drones are hitting everywhere. So yes, it's true that this one happened to hit a military base, but it's only one of thousands.
Another question I have is, how did they know, or did they know, that these soldiers were actually sitting and having dinner at the time?
That part, I don't imagine that they knew that it was going to hit in the cafeteria when they were eating dinner. I mean, it takes time for the drones to get where they're going. They probably were targeting the base. They probably hit one of the larger buildings at the base, and unfortunately, I think it just happened that there was a large number of soldiers in the room at the same time, in exactly the room where it got hit. So don't give them too much credit necessarily, but who knows? It's possible.
Yeah, it's certainly. I think it's certainly possible, but time will tell. At the same time, there was a drone strike, just proving what I said before, over the Yom Kippur holiday, or just as Yom Kippur was coming in which Hezbollah, another drone, struck a nursing home with Holocaust survivors, causing damage there and sending people into shock.
I think that proves your point.
Yeah, for sure. But at the same time, let's be somewhat positive here. Israel is certainly making progress against Hezbollah. Over Yom Kippur, the IDF killed 50 terrorists in face-to-face encounters, along with air support, of course, destroying terrorist infrastructure, over 200 targets of Hezbollah, according to the Israel Defense Forces, were taken out. So there is definitely a lot of progress, and reports I'm hearing from those who are covering the war on the front itself are saying Israel is doing a lot of good and is really sticking it to Hezbollah.
They've definitely been filing down Hezbollah's capabilities, but as we noted here, Hezbollah's fired 320 projectiles at Israel during the Holy Day. So you had people all in the north of the country that were forced into bomb shelters instead of being in synagogue where they'd otherwise be praying. And it kind of reminds you back to when Ramadan was starting and how Western countries were pushing Israel to, halt the fighting or have a ceasefire during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan in Gaza. Here you have the holiest day. This war started on Simchat Torah, maybe the second holiest day on the calendar, third holiest day on the calendar, and on Yom Kippur, which is without a doubt the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, Israelis are ducking into bomb shelters.
At the same time, there is a report that Prime Minister Netanyahu, during his conversation with President Joe Biden on Thursday, received a request from the U.S. president to take some time off and not to strike Beirut. And the prime minister, from what I read, denied that that was the case. But nevertheless, all indications are that Israel, I haven't seen any media reports indicating that Israel's targeted Beirut over the last couple of days. And then here you have this series of drone strikes. I mean, that's upsetting to me that that is the case.
Right. So certainly the Israel denying that took place in the call. So we don't know. I mean, if I would imagine that the prime minister would deny that. I would also imagine that there's a lot of reporting going on here that's not really based in reality. How do people know what was on that private call between Biden and Netanyahu? But the evidence does seem to suggest that the IDF has paused on the attacks in Beirut. And you remember that Nasrallah and some of the top leadership of Hezbollah were taken out in Beirut. Beirut's a little bit further north, inside Lebanon. Most of the military operation has been focused on southern Lebanon and pushing Hezbollah back away from the Israeli border. Israel's been very, very active inside Lebanon over the last several days. So there's not been a pause in fighting by any means, but certainly there haven't been attacks inside the capital city, densely populated city of Beirut. If that is true, then you have to ask yourself, why would Netanyahu agree to that? Why would he give in to that? Right now, you see that Netanyahu has gained momentum in this war by pushing through the red lights given by the Biden administration, the president. And you see here that if Israel did in fact give into it, then the momentum sort of shifting back. Like this drone strike that we just talked about, this is a piece of momentum shifting back into Hezbollah's favor. Now, I don't think that means that the complete momentum of the war has shifted. It hasn't. I think Israel's way ahead in terms of this war, but it seemed like Israel was driving forward with success after success after success. This drone strike in the army base was a reminder that Hezbollah still has tremendous capabilities, even as Israel's done so much to hit so many of the launchers and the long-range missiles and to take out not only the top command centers, but also the central command, the mid-level command of Hezbollah. But Israel doesn't have so much time to wait in this war, and it needs to press forward. So the question then is, why might he agree to that? And the secondary question is, what does Netanyahu think that he needs from the United States? What did he ask of Biden, where there's a sort of a trade maybe going on? And we see that there's a lot of talk not only about the war in Lebanon, but the war in Iran. And I think that's really probably what most of that call had to do with. And so perhaps Netanyahu recognized that, okay, we can operate in southern Lebanon for the next several days. We'll pause in Beirut because we're planning something with regard to Iran. We need America's help for that. So these are the types of discussions and calculations that the Prime Minister of Israel has to make. And
that's really the next question: is why is Israel waiting to strike Iran? In the head of the octopus, it's been nearly 2 weeks since Iran fired around 200 ballistic missiles at the state of Israel. NBC News reported on Saturday that Jerusalem's target lists for its retaliatory attack against Iran will include military and energy infrastructure, perhaps not nuclear facilities. Again, these are reports by news outlets, also saying that Jerusalem and Washington are closer to a consensus on the scope of Israel's planned retaliatory strike on Iran. Axios says on Thursday, citing 3 U.S. and Israeli officials. So the question is, why are we waiting? Why isn't it happening yet? When will it happen? How will it happen? What will Israel strike? All these things right now are up in the air.
So there's a ton of speculation in the media now about what Israel's going to do and when, what it is going to hit, what it isn't going to hit. I think the axiom goes here that those who know don't say, and those who say don't know. I think Israel's keeping its cards very close to its chest right now. The question of whether Israel should hit the nuclear infrastructure, I think that Israel's never going to have a better opportunity to go after the nuclear infrastructure than now. The question is, do they have the capabilities to do it? Are they going to go after the oil infrastructure, right? There's arguments being made that, well, the oil, belongs to the people of Iran. It's a natural resource and asset of the entire country, not just of the regime, even though it is the lifeblood of the funding of the regime. The regime is able to fund Hezbollah and Hamas because of the monies that they get from selling oil. Any sanctions are going to target the selling of oil. So certainly there would be good indications that Israel should go after the oil infrastructure. So now you're hearing reports that maybe they'll only hit the energy infrastructure, that they'll only hit military targets. We don't know. Why are they waiting? Well, a few reasons. Number one is, carrying out a bold attack, and the defense minister said that the attack will be surprising, it'll be stunning, it'll be precise. Putting the battle plans in action to make sure that the battle plans are flawless, right? Meanwhile, Iran's not shooting. Okay, so there is time for Israel to plan the strike and to get it right. But I think more important than that is also making sure that the air defenses are strengthened up. I mean, we saw that Israel got hit very hard by the ballistic missiles. Yes, they had a lot of success. They took most of those ballistic missiles out of the sky. That was when Iran fired 200. Reports are that maybe as many as 30, 33, 34 ballistic missiles actually hit the country. That's a huge amount. And in the next round, maybe Iran could send more. Now, I've heard varying reports about how many of these ballistic missiles Iran actually has, and that might have to do with also the level of the ballistic missiles, because there's different grades and different generations of these ballistic missiles. These Fatah 2 missiles, which are the ones that were sent over, they seem to be able to evade air defense systems. But next time around, Iran might send 300 or 400 or 500. Maybe the estimates are that they might have 700 to 800 of these. Other estimates that I've read are as many as 3,000 ballistic missiles of varying degrees and generations. So Israel wants to make sure that it is prepared for any kind of counterattack.
So if Israel does strike, we are already preparing for a potential counterstrike. Reports here over the last several days that U.S. troops might actually operate on Israeli soil, the U.S. to potentially deploy the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system here in Israel, which actually would be operated by American troops. I mean, that seems perhaps unprecedented. Has that ever happened before? U.S. troops on Israeli soil defending? I don't remember back when we had the Patriots back in the Gulf War back in '91. Perhaps there were some Americans involved in operating those, but this seems like a next level in terms of defense. If you actually have U.S. troops here on the ground putting their lives at risk, operating these THAAD anti-ballistic missile systems.
Well, I think what's less important than the troops. So you're talking maybe they said 100 troops, to operate a purely defensive system. But I think it's really clear that Israel does need to bolster its air defense systems. One area where the Biden administration has been consistent is in their offer to help defend the country against rockets. We saw that on April 13th. We may have seen it again on October 1st when 181 ballistic missiles were sent. The United States saying it did somehow participate, but I think the THAAD system, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, is supposed to be one of the world's best systems for defending against ballistic missiles. And clearly the Arrow and the David Sling, while being somewhat successful, is not successful enough. You need to have close to 100% capability. So adding the THAAD system does bolster the Israeli air defense, and good that the United States is helping to do that. At the same time, the air defenses, what they do is they force Israel, or the other world leaders force Israel to accept the strikes because the air defenses intercept, which is the wrong concept. If they fire with the intent to kill, you have to retaliate as if those attacks were successful. So we'll see what happens here, but certainly Israel trying to bolster its air defenses. I I think it's good that the Biden administration is sending, clearly Israeli troops are not using the THAAD system. So who's going to use it?
Right.
So the United States sending the system and also sending the manpower to operate it.
Turning back to Lebanon now, you have a group called UNIFIL. These are supposed to be the UN peacekeepers who, all the way back from 2006, were charged with keeping the peace in southern Lebanon, disarming Hezbollah, keeping them away from the border. Obviously, they have failed in that mission. At the same time, you have the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, on Saturday, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu on Sunday, accusing Hezbollah of using these peacekeepers in Lebanon as human shields for its attacks. The prime minister urging them to move further north to stay away from the front lines of the war. I mean, UNIFIL, from what I've seen over the last decade and a half plus, I mean, they essentially are, I believe, are willingly serving as these human shields. I mean, the defense minister didn't outright say it. He said that they are being used by Hezbollah, but I don't think they mind being the human shields of Hezbollah. They're not keeping the peace. They didn't disarm Hezbollah. They're sitting up there. I don't even know what they're armed with. If they have any serious weaponry, they're not an army, but they're supposed to be keeping the peace. Yet they've absolutely failed, and even worse, as they make Israel look bad, because Israel strikes a Hezbollah site. UNIFIL, these UN representatives are in the area, and then the whole world accuses Israel of targeting UN officials. So you have a multi-pronged failure, which is UNIFIL UNRWA down in Gaza, a complete failure, and now you UNIFIL up there in Lebanon.
Right. So in 2006, Israel really ended its campaign in Lebanon too early. They were forced into a ceasefire. Ehud Olmert was the prime minister. Tzipi Livni was the foreign minister. She was the one who negotiated the ceasefire, and the UN resolution 1701 was supposed to bring in UN peacekeepers, UNIFIL, in order to make sure that Hezbollah did not arm itself south of the Litani River, which means in the southern area closest to the Israeli border. Obviously, all of the buildup that's taken place over the last period has all been under the watch of UNIFIL. And so when Israel decided to launch its ground operation into southern Lebanon, what they said on day one is, we are asking now for UNIFIL, which did not do the job of keeping the peace in southern Lebanon, to abandon their posts and to retreat north so that the IDF could operate according to its needs. UNIFIL has refused to abandon its posts. Okay, so they are standing in the way of the IDF. The IDF has made it very clear that they don't want them there, because they have no intention of trying to kill these useless peacekeepers. They just want them to go. And obviously, if the IDF's operating in the area, that's the clearest indication of all that they have absolutely failed in their mission. It's time for them to leave. Now, they've refused to do that. And what they're doing is essentially providing cover for Hezbollah. They're serving as human shields, protecting them on the one. And now they're also running to the United Nations and complaining when their peacekeeping troops, which are not doing anything, are coming in the line of fire. Okay, so they're actually harming the Israeli war effort. And then there was one complaint recently that that tanks had basically were coming under attack, and they had to retreat and turn around, and they went towards some UNIFIL position and apparently kicked up some smoke. That's what one of the complaints is, that they made it unsafe for UNIFIL soldiers to be in their post because of smoke inhalation. Like, give me a break. Get out of the area for the sake of your own lives. And if you don't want to leave, well, we don't want to hear about it. And I think Israel should be delivering a more forceful message about it and saying that if UNIFIL doesn't leave, that they're going to be considered enemy combatant, or Israel's not going to go out of its way to protect them at this point. They're being ordered to leave. Israel's saying that they're not going to force UNIFIL out, that they're requesting that they go out, try to use diplomatic pressure to get them out. But at this point, and Carolyn Glick tweeted this yesterday, she wrote, very simple, UNIFIL equals Hezbollah at this point.
Yeah, UNRWA is Hamas, UNIFIL is Hezbollah. And I think there was another tweet out there. Somebody indicated that perhaps UNIFIL was actually causing more damage and harm than we even suspected by reporting on, you mentioned the tanks, reporting on IDF troop movements to the world.
Exactly. Broadcasting troop movements, including, how many troops, when, where. So they're actually, operating clearly against the IDF.
Do they just love Hezbollah so much? I mean, you're talking about peacekeepers from nations all over the world. I read people from Sri Lanka and all these other countries. I mean, they're willing to put their lives on the line by standing in the way of the IDF. Is it they love Hezbollah so much? Are they being pressured by Hezbollah to stand there? I mean, what do you think the motivation is? Are they simply Israel haters?
It's a hatred of the state of Israel that you see all over the world, and especially in the United Nations. The United Nations is the world's largest anti-Semitic body today. There's no body in the world that is as well funded as the United Nations, that has all these agencies. Every single one of the UN agencies works day and night against the state of Israel. What Israel is still doing at the United Nations, that's the question. You know, Israel has now taken efforts to kick UNRWA out of the country. That's the refugee agency that perpetuates the Palestinian refugee crisis up to the third and fourth generation now.
Holds people there as pawns.
Exactly. They're the largest employer inside Palestinian areas. And UNIFIL is the same. Okay. They could have done the job to protect that area from falling into the hands of Hezbollah, but shame on Israel for signing that 1701 and for trusting UN peacekeepers. But that also goes to demonstrate why in this war, Israel is not going to declare any kind of a ceasefire that's going to rely on the guarantees of international peacekeeping. Right? Israel cannot do it, and they see clearly that they can't do it by the effectiveness or ineffectiveness here of UNIFIL.
Turning down to Gaza now, in southern Israel now, the IDF recently launched a fresh ground offensive in northern Gaza to prevent Hamas from reestablishing itself there. Fortunately, several IDF soldiers were killed in the last several days. New evacuation orders over the weekend to several neighborhoods in northern Gaza, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, and some of the other neighborhoods in northern Gaza. The north, essentially, from what I understand, cut off from Gaza City, blocking access between them, between those points so that the IDF can operate freely. Unfortunately, Hamas, as we've talked about before, trying to reestablish itself in northern Gaza. They fired a few rockets at Israel over the last several days as well. What can we expect from this latest operation?
Well, I think we're still seeing that the war is raging inside Gaza, even though it's definitely on a lower intensity level in terms of the number of troops that are inside Gaza, with more of the attention being focused toward Lebanon. But the war is still going to continue. People ask, how long are these operations going to last? I think we can safely assume that these types of operations inside Gaza could last for up to a year or more. As Hamas continues to try to reorganize itself in the Gaza Strip. If you remember, Israel identified that Hamas had 24 to 25 battalions. And Israel said that it has eliminated the battalions. But what's the definition of eliminating a battalion? They say that means degrading the battalion to the point where 50% of the battalion are killed or injured. What that means is that essentially you might have up to 40% of a battalion that wasn't eliminated, right? So the battalion doesn't function in an organized fashion the way it did before, but now with more time, they're able to reorganize and create new battalions, new command structures, and there's still a fighting force. Yes, a much degraded fighting force from the beginning of the war, but certainly a fighting force that can do damage and can continue to drag this out, create a war of attrition situation at this point inside Gaza. So I do think that Israel's going to continue moving and having these types of limited operations. Now, what you could see at some point, especially if this war now escalates and Israel attacks Iran, and we don't know what that attack is going to look like, but you might get to a point where the war does end, right? If Israel succeeds in taking out its targets inside Iran and does it in a conclusive way, and that can't be a war of attrition. Israel cannot be in a war of attrition with Iran. Israel has to operate quick and concisely and conclusively inside Iran. But you might get to a point where the major escalation comes to a conclusion in Iran. The major escalation comes to a conclusion in southern Lebanon. Then you might get some kind of regional ceasefire arrangement. Israel's saying with regard to a ceasefire in Lebanon that they're demanding that they would still have the access and the opportunity to have limited targeted raids similar to what they have in Judea and Samaria at present. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen the front of Judea and Samaria emerge into this all-out war. There has been a lot of terror, but the reason why it hasn't been all-out terror, it hasn't been all-out intifada, is because Israel moves in and out of Judea and Samaria with targeted raids that file down their capabilities as they come up. So Israel's going to want to have that opportunity to do that, but you might see at some point in the confines of a larger regional ceasefire agreement, maybe Israel removing its troops and then only going into targeted raids where it moves in and out of the Gaza Strip on a daily basis. Another question is, is there a punishment for Gaza and Hamas aside from the military operation, and specifically in the north? There are calls inside Israel, particularly by some of the more experienced and more hawkish military leaders and former military leaders, that Israel should establish some kind of sovereignty or control over the northern Gaza Strip. The idea that the only thing that actually teaches Palestinians is to lose land, right? Losing life is not a penalty, because in their culture, if you become a martyr, that's the greatest honor. It's honor or shame. If you die killing Israelis, that's an honor. The shame is losing land. And so there are calls in Israel for Israel to take over at least a significant buffer zone in northern Gaza. And you see now that Israel's clearing that area out. So we don't know what the next phase is. Certainly Netanyahu's not going to talk about that, but we might see at some point in the future Israel potentially taking over some land in the north.
We've talked about the mistake of 2005 of Israel leaving Gaza entirely. So we'll see how this plays out if Israel decides to maintain a full-time presence of some sort in northern Gaza. Turning to the October 7th attacks itself, a New York Times reporter over the weekend indicated that documents seized by Israel back in January showed that Iran actually knew that the October 7th attack was going to take place. They decided that they were not going to directly be involved in that attack because they needed more time to prepare or whatnot. Hezbollah the same, but nevertheless, Hamas said, no, we're going to go ahead, we're going to do this alone. And for several reasons, but one that I want to bring up, I think is the most important for us here in the state of Israel, is that Hamas saw that we were fighting amongst ourselves. There was disunity amongst the people of Israel. There was division over judicial reform. There were fights between religious and secular, left and right. The country was in shambles exactly a year ago before Simchat Torah, the October 7th attacks. And that's when Hamas said they are at their weakest, we are going to strike. So I think that's what we can learn, unfortunately, from Hamas's decision to act alone.
Certainly a learning lesson for Israel. It was relatively quiet here, and Israel created its own domestic crisis that didn't need to be. There's ways to oppose policies, and to try to, the court could basically overturn the judicial reforms. This could have played itself out without calls for civil war inside the country, without calls by reservists and Air Force pilots saying, if there's a war, we're not going to show up. Those were public calls. Mm-hmm. So what do you think Hamas understands when they hear that? They see the country divided. They see the country distracted. They hear that that the reservists are not going to come, that the Air Force is not going to show up. And there was other reasons why Hamas chose to act at the time that they did. It was very clear that Israel was marching forward toward a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia. They wanted to prevent that, because the normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia is effectively the end of the larger Israeli-Arab conflict. Right? You take Saudi Arabia out of the picture. If they say, look, we're not in conflict with Israel anymore. Now you've got the whole Gulf here with the Emiratis and Bahrain, other countries likely to join also if the Saudis, following the Saudis' lead. And where does that leave the Palestinians? So they didn't want to see that happen. They wanted to bring the Palestinian veto essentially over peace back, and that's why they attacked. Now they made a huge mistake, because did they hurt Israel on October 7th? Yes. They killed 1,200 people. They kidnapped 250. They injured thousands of others. Since October 7th, absolute military disaster for Hamas, and they failed to kill any Israelis inside Israel, maybe one or two civilians near the Erez crossing, I believe, in an air rocket attack or a direct attack, cross border, but really not able to do any meaningful damage inside Israel after October 8th. And the entire Gaza Strip has been degraded and destroyed to a large extent. So a major, major mistake. Now, you can look at the fact that Iran knew about this. They obviously knew about it. There's reports that there were big meetings in Beirut just 2 weeks before this attack, that that this was known about by Hezbollah. This was known about by Iran. The fact that they didn't decide to join in is a big miracle for the state of Israel, because if Hezbollah would have launched a simultaneous attack or soon after on October 8th, October 9th, Israel was not ready. Okay, and we saw the damage that Hamas did on October 7th. If the Radwan forces of Hezbollah had attacked us from the north at the same time, there could have been thousands, if not tens of thousands of people killed, because that's a much larger force that could have crossed the border than came across from Gaza. And so to Israel's benefit, that for whatever calculations, Iran and Hezbollah decided not to come in. They're getting dragged in now. But now when Hezbollah is ramping up its attacks, Israel's already filed down much of its capabilities, and Israel's prevented that cross-border attack. And now, but I think the most important thing here to understand, and we've said it so many times on this show, is that this is proof from the very beginning, again, that this is not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is a war between Israel and Iran. Iran has spent decades funding proxies to create a ring of terror around Israel. Israel is now fighting all of Iran's terror proxies at the same time. This was never about the Palestinians. That's why the Palestinians in Jerusalem were quiet. That's why there's no rioting of Arabs in Lod and Ramla like we saw 2 years ago. They're not fighting, and Israel's not fighting the Palestinians. Maybe that will happen before the end of this war. I don't know. But for the meanwhile, this is a war between Israel and Iran.
Iran, certainly the head of the octopus, and you mentioned the potential of a cross-border attack from the north, and that Radwan force, they were actually preparing to carry out a similar October 7th style massacre in the Galilee as Hamas did. So as you mentioned, thank God they didn't do that.
They have significant tunnel infrastructure, right?
Yeah, we're finding it now.
And one of the things, Israel always knew that Hamas had these tunnels, and it was rumored that maybe Hezbollah had some tunnels. We're seeing now that the tunnel infrastructure in southern Lebanon is potentially even as sophisticated or more sophisticated than the tunnel infrastructure in Gaza. And not only that, digging the tunnels in southern Lebanon is more difficult than it is digging them in Gaza, because Gaza is close to the beach and the terrain there is more sandy. So when you're digging under the ground, it's softer ground. Here in southern Lebanon, the terrain is different. There's a lot of rock underground, and these are very strong, like well-built, deep-built tunnels. Some of them go 150 feet down under the ground. Many of them built right under UNIFIL posts, for that matter, as we discussed.
True.
So, and clear that they would have tried also to kidnap and take hostages inside southern Lebanon. In fact, when we lost the 8 soldiers, as we talked about like a week ago, that was because they tried to prevent the kidnapping of a dead soldier, a dead body. So Israel has managed so far to avoid that threat.
One last item here as we turn to the east or the southeast, and the Houthis, they also want a piece of the action as usual. They have threatened to increase their attacks against Navy vessels and ships in the Red Sea if, in fact, Israel strikes Iran. If the situation escalates between Israel and Iran, the Houthis want a piece of the action. They said that they are going to increase their attacks as well. And it's, not surprising at all. Not surprising at all. The Houthis
what do they have to lose, right?
Why not?
It's a poor country, and they'll do what their masters in Iran tell them to do. The question is, what is going to be their penalty? I mean, they've been hit twice, by Israel, maybe more than twice. They've been hit a little bit by U.S. forces, some symbolic attacks. They should be hit really hard. I mean, there should be a penalty. Everybody around the world should see what happens when you destroy the peace. When you start attacking other sovereign nations, when you interrupt international shipping in these major corridors, through into the Red Sea. They're interrupting the shipping of the Suez Canal. Every country should be participating in strikes on Houthis, at least threatening to say, look, we're going to mount an international force against you. You do this again, your entire country is going to be blown to smithereens. That hasn't happened. I mean, the question is, why hasn't that happened? Well, because look who the Houthis are attacking. Look why they're involved in the war. The Houthis declared war. Yemen declared active war against the state of Israel from the very beginning. And that's the reason why you don't see the international coalition against them. I would have to imagine before this war is over that the Houthis are going to absorb significant punishment. But in terms of the orders of priority, obviously Hezbollah a much bigger priority because of the threat to the Israeli home front, and Iran, the head of the terror octopus. You get them out, the Houthis become a sideshow.
Absolutely. And we're nearly out of time here on Jerusalem Minute, but we are just past the holiday of Yom Kippur and now headed towards the holiday of celebration of joy and happiness, Sukkot, an 8-day holiday. My hands are a little bit sore, actually, spending time getting up my sukkah. For those unfamiliar, the Jewish people are commanded to spend 8 days in essentially a booth outside of our houses. It shows how we rely on God as the weather starts to get a little bit colder. We rely on God's protection. So we dwell in these temporary residence outside our homes for 8 days. If you're not familiar, if you haven't been to Israel, I highly recommend you come and check out the holiday of Sukkot here in Israel. But again, my hands are a little bit tired after building several Sukkot over the last couple of days.
Yeah, Sukkot is really one of the best festivals in the country. It's a week-long festival. As you said, we go into these booths. The booths don't have roofs. The roofs are made out of bamboo or materials, that were taken off of trees or other plants. You're supposed to be able to see through it to see the stars. So I hope that people dwelling in their sukkahs are not seeing ballistic missiles overhead, but that's possible. But as you said, it's a reminder to the Jewish people that there's nothing permanent. Your house is not a permanent dwelling either. It's just that it's your dwelling as long as you live in it. And really, there's only divine protection. We've seen a tremendous amount of divine protection during this war. Despite all of the attacks, the damage could have been so much greater, could have been exponentially worse than it's been. A lot of that is divine protection. This is an important reminder. It's a time when there's usually a ton of tourism. Last year on Sukkot, the country was bustling with tourists.
Packed.
And I just days before October 7th, saying to others, Israel's finally back, because tourism is a big part of the Israeli experience. And with COVID, the tourism here is grinded to a halt. And finally, last year on Sukkot, the country was bustling, filled with tourists who were making their first trips in a long time. And then, of course, many of them were here for the horrific October 7th disaster, which has launched this year-long war already that has really harmed the tourism. And the last day of the Sukkot holiday, the 8th day after the 7th-day festival, is Simchat Torah, and that is the day that we were attacked, right? So everybody refers to it as October 7th. What day did October 7th fall on? It fell on the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah, which means the joy of Torah. And in a way, I would say that I am somewhat glad that the day that's been canonized as the anniversary of the memorial of this attack is October 7th and not Simchat Torah, because really nothing can take away the joy of Torah. And this, I think, is going to give permission to Israelis for year on to make Simchat Torah a day of joy and a day of celebration and not a day of remembrance. So, a small, but I think important, symbolic. And I'm not sure, by the way, that the people that canonized it as October 7th meant to do that. And maybe they would have preferred to ruin the Jewish holy day, but they didn't. And, hopefully this year, the light of and the joy of Torah and Simchat Torah and Sukkot is going to be great to push Israel toward a momentous victory and turn this whole holiday into a time of joy and rejoicing and not a time of sadness and trauma.
Amen to that. Please God, the tourists will come back to Israel very, very soon, and Simchat Torah will return to be a day of happiness and joy as we celebrate beginning the reading of the Torah once again. And that's going to do it for this week's edition of Jerusalem Minute. My name is Josh Hasten here in Jerusalem with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. Shout out to Ryan Lifshitz and Zach Sickerman for everything they do behind the scenes here. Don't forget, you can go on to YouTube, check out all of the wonderful programming JNS TV has to offer. Also go to jns.org for all the latest news from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world. Chag Sameach, Chag Sukkot Sameach from all of us here at JNS. Take care, everybody.